Topic for our Dhamma talk tonight is Chittanupasana Satipaṭṭhāna, namely mindful contemplation of the mind. And in order to appreciate the Buddha's invention of this contemplation of the mind, it's useful to approach it by looking at a number of situations that might arise when one does not undertake this contemplation of the mind. So, not understanding the true nature of the mind in its many different aspects, some difficult mental states like intense craving may arise. Craving for another person's possession. And as one is not aware of the driving force, one then may go ahead and then try to get what one craves for so much. And this, if it's not one's own property, sooner or later will lead to some trouble. Likewise, when one is not fully aware of the nature of hatred or ill will or anger, these are all aspects of the same thing, then one might get very angry with the remark made by maybe one's boss, or maybe by a teacher, or maybe by a spouse or partner, or one might get even upset about something that one's children are doing. So there are many reasons that may trigger one's anger, and so, or they may activate one's anger, and this then may lead to all sorts of consequences. So one might find oneself yelling and screaming, or hitting a door or whatnot. There are many expressions to this, and later on one might regret. Or a similar case is how to deal with the anger, ill will, hatred of another person. Again, it could be one's boss, it could be one's partner or spouse, it could be one's son or daughter, or it could be some stranger, it could be some salesperson in a big supermarket. It really doesn't matter. And so, if one becomes the victim of such anger or hatred, then how to respond to it? Does one respond with the same amount of anger? Does one retaliate in kind? If so, a problem tends to arise, and one might get oneself entangled. And again, not truly understanding the nature of the mind, one might experience a particular condition in one's life, and then lots of fear arises, and one doesn't know how to deal with it. And as a result of this, the fear might get stronger and stronger and stronger, and in the end one gets totally entangled in the fear. Or the same thing may happen with anxiety. And the same thing may also happen with regard to depression. Some condition arises in one's life that is unfavorable, not as planned, not as expected, and at first there's just a mild disappointment with the situation, but then as things continue and get worse, it might gradually develop into a full-blown depression if there's not much one can do to change it. And in this way, a person might get entangled in the mental state of depression. And the same thing may happen with many of the other unwholesome mental states or destructive emotions, as Daniel Goleman calls them. And then again, not understanding the true nature of the mind, one might then have a certain experience and interpret it as a mystical experience. Some supreme being, or by the grace of some supreme being, one is having this wonderful, outstanding, phenomenal experience. Or that may happen that and one gets then totally entangled in this and interprets it in a very particular manner. And then what may also happen is, again, not understanding the true nature of the mind, one takes certain formations in the end to be non-existent, leading to nihilism. Or one might take one might see the world as in this, or according to the idea of all is unity. So whatever supreme being there is, it is united with all phenomena. Or one might see the world as a plurality. And in all of these certain cases, one gets entangled in a certain way, not even realizing what is happening. Now, owing to this entanglement, the Buddha has spoken in verse as follows, as is recorded in the Samyutta Nikaya 1, Samyutta 1 in then the Sutta 23. And these are also the opening verses of the Visuddhimagga. A tangle inside, a tangle outside. This generation, and generation here stands for living beings, is entangled in a tangle. I ask you this, O Gautama, who can disentangle this tangle? A man or woman established on virtue, wise, developing the mind and wisdom. A bhikkhu or bhikkhuni, male or female meditator, with ardent energy and prudent, can disentangle this tangle. And so what interests us most is this second verse, but just for the sake of completion and to satisfy maybe your the interest, to give you the third verse 2, those for whom lust and hatred along with ignorance have been expunged, the arahants with taints destroyed, for them the tangle is disentangled. So final disentangling of the tangle comes with the attainment of the path of arahantship. Now, in order to get there, we need to gain a really clear understanding of what the mind is all about. And we also need to gain an understanding into the different and the many detailed aspects of the mind. Now, as non-meditators, we might relate to our own mind as just one more or less permanent, quite solid, quite stable entity. And certainly in Western thoughts, philosophical thought, René Descartes has, for instance, formulated cogito ergo sum. I am thinking, therefore I am. So, this statement then says, as long as there's thinking, or the thinking makes up the personality, and we can then elaborate on this by postulating, well, I'm feeling, therefore I am, or I'm having perceptions, therefore I am. And so these are, as we will soon see, all wrongful, based on a wrongful understanding of the mind. Now, what does all of this mean to us as meditators? In the beginning of the meditation practice, we are at times overwhelmed by worries, by regrets, by fear, by anger, jealousy, depression, anxiety, obsessive thoughts, high expectations, mental stress, competition with other meditators, pride, wrong view, and so on. We tend to identify with these mental states, taking them to be my worries, my fear, my anger, my depression, and so on. And as a result of this, we end up with a lot of mental suffering. And so we feel miserable. On top of this, we tend to perceive these mental states to be permanent and substantial. They seem so real. They seem to take on another or a full reality. At times we may be going through an emotional storm, especially when the 5 hindrances arise in our meditation practice. In a nutshell, we're deeply entangled in the tangle of mental states. To disentangle ourselves from this tangle, we can do the following. By observing an ethical code of conduct, like the 5 precepts or 8 precepts or 10 precepts or the monastic vows, we ensure that we will be free from a bad conscience and free from regret and worries. In this way, we ensure that our future circumstances will be wholesome and pleasant. And it is thus that we begin to disentangle this tangle so difficult to disentangle. By developing concentration, we manage to suppress the 5 hindrances, and thus the emotional storm calms down to some extent, and we suffer less. Again, we disentangle this tangle of mental states with the help of concentration. And then, as intuitive insight or wisdom arises in the form of the first insight knowledge, we realize that mental states are fundamentally different from physical objects. We also realize that some mental states are wholesome, in Pali referred to as kusala, and others are unwholesome, referred to in Pali as akusala. we further realize that it is not my anxiety, not my worries, not my depression, not my anger and so on, but just mental states of anxiety, of fear, of worry, and so on. In this way, we disentangle the tangle of mental states some more. We learn to disidentify or to disassociate from the mental states. Next, we begin to notice that or how some internal or external phenomena cause an unwholesome mental state to arise. And we begin to see some cause and effect links. Again, we disentangle the tangle of mental states some more. And with this, for instance, we at least get an inkling of the fact that our mental events are not happening in a causeless manner or in a haphazard manner, but rather that they are pretty much governed by cause and effect. Now, with further development in our meditation practice, we see how a mental state arises and then changes. Sometimes it intensifies, sometimes it de-intensifies or disintensifies, and finally it disappears. With this, we realize that a mental state, after all, is not that permanent, but rather transitory in nature. And certainly with this we gain a direct understanding of anicca, impermanence, with regard to mental states. With continued meditation practice, we realize that mental states are unsatisfactory in nature, conducive to suffering, and not conducive to happiness. And certainly thus dukkha becomes evident. Next, we realize that mental states arise of their own accord. Their arising is beyond our control, and that they lack a core. And a mental state is no longer seen as the self or belonging to a self, or to a soul, or an ego, or an individual. There is no more identification with it. And certainly this then gives the meditator some first understanding of the universal characteristic of non-self, anatta, in the Pali scriptural language. Now, with further development of one's meditation, a meditator sees a mental state quickly arising and quickly passing away, and then another mental state rapidly appears to then disappear. This happens over and over again. Now, with all of this, a meditator gradually gains an understanding that the mind is not just this permanent entity that seems so stable and that we tend to own, or that we think we are owning, that we are in control of. And so the tremendous contribution that the Buddha has made is with this contemplation of the mind, Cittanupassana, is that he's looking at the mind not as some general entity or compact entity, but rather he does what we do with the body, namely he dissects it into all its many many parts, and lets the meditator carefully observe what is actually there. So it's kind of like taking stock of what occurs in the mind, and knowing what is what, and seeing the link between one mental state and another mental state, and seeing that the mind is not one general entity, but rather it consists of many different mental states, with each possessing a different quality. So Chittanupasana in the end is nothing else than kind of doing an inventory when it comes to the mind. An inventory of the mind, and simply just observing and stating what is there and how things are relating to one another. Now, the actual instruction that the Buddha has given us with regard to the contemplation of the mind is as follows, and I'm quoting from the middle-length discourses, the 10th Sutta. And how bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, male and female meditators, does a meditator abide contemplating mind as mind? Here, a meditator understands mind affected by lust as affected by lust, and mind unaffected by lust as unaffected by lust. A meditator furthermore understands mind affected by hate as mind affected by hate, and mind unaffected by hate as unaffected by hate. A meditator furthermore understands mind affected by delusion as mind affected by delusion, and mind unaffected by delusion as unaffected by delusion. Furthermore, a meditator understands contracted mind as such, and distracted mind as such, namely as a distracted mind. And a meditator understands an exalted or great mind as exalted, and an unexalted mind as unexalted mind. A meditator understands surpassed mind as surpassed mind, and unsurpassed mind as unsurpassed mind. He or she understands concentrated mind as concentrated mind, and an unconcentrated mind as an unconcentrated mind. A meditator furthermore understands a liberated mind as such, and an unliberated mind as unliberated. Now, this passage from the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta makes mention of 16 states of mind. And these 16 states of mind pretty much cover what comes up in the mind. And when we look at these 16 states of mind, then we will find that they are classified in particular ways. So at first, one of the governing principles is contrasting an unwholesome mind, namely a mind affected by lust, with a mind unaffected by lust. And the same thing goes for hatred, for delusion. And then an exalted mind versus an unexalted mind, and so on and so forth. Now, the second governing principle here, classificatory principle, is that of distinguishing between ordinary ordinary states of mind pertaining to the sense sphere consciousness, and states of mind that pertain to the lofty mind. So some higher states of mind. So what we have is a set of 8 states that pertain to the ordinary sense sphere consciousness, and another set of 8 that pertain to the lofty mind. And these then shall be explained further. One more observation. When it comes to the ordinary states of mind, the first 8, we find that the first 3 pairs consist of a mind that is affected by lust versus a mind that is unaffected by lust. So one is unwholesome, the other one is wholesome. And then the same thing for anger, a mind affected by anger and versus a mind unaffected by anger. So another contrast of unwholesome versus wholesome. And then the same thing, a mind affected by the confusion of delusion versus a mind that is free or unaffected by delusion. So again, unwholesome versus wholesome. And then 2 mental states are mentioned that don't quite fit into the general picture. And those are the contracted mind versus the distracted mind. So with these 2, do we have here another pair of one unwholesome, the other wholesome? What do you think? Huh? Mary, you shake your head? Any other comments? So when you shake your hand, then I take this to mean that these are what? Not a true pair of contrasts. So then would it be right to assume that this is a pair of wholesome mental states? Oh, that neither. So then what we're left with is a pair of unwholesome mental states. And indeed, both of these, they don't fit into the general pattern, and both of them are unwholesome, and the contracted state of mind in the Pali language known as Sankita Chaita is actually being identified by the commentators as representing sloth and torpor, or a mind governed by sloth and torpor, and a distracted mind, Vikita Chaita Pali, is a mind that is governed by restlessness and remorse, Uddhacca and Kukucca. Now, when it comes to the actual practice of Chittanupassana, there is one aspect that we very much need to keep in mind. Now, non-meditators or uninformed meditators will or might, in the face of some unwholesome mental state, do the following. So let's say heavy anger has arisen in the mind, and the person says, "This is too much, I'll get drunk." And sooner or later, I'll forget about the issue that then triggers the hatred. So, or a person might say, well, I'm so depressed because of a particular situation in my life. The only way to get over this depression is by going to the movies. And or I've heard, and please don't laugh, I've heard of a case, actually I know of a person who, when feeling somewhat uneasy, unhappy with life, would then simply get into her car and start up the engine and drive the car wherever the car would take her. So, from places, from all the way from Rome to London, or from Rome maybe to Munich. So, apparently, there are people who do this. Maybe not quite to this extreme, but just roaming around in one's car might be a way of getting over one's depression. Have you ever done this? No? Oh, yes. See? At least we have one person. And so we tend to try to escape or to run away unwholesome mental states in different ways. And so simply we are not facing them. And another common approach to the arising of unwholesome or an unwholesome mental state would be to act on it. So, when strong anger has arisen, then to pick a quarrel. And with just the next person who walks by. Now, this doesn't seem very wise, but some people do this. Or other people might say, well, acting out the anger is not it's not quite right. But what if I just suppress it? And I'll just keep swallowing the issue day after day, and this then will ensure peace and harmony at home. What do you think? Will this work in the long run? This will not work either. So, with regard to difficult mental states, the various options exist. We can either try to repress those mental states, or we might decide to act on them, which might have serious consequences, or we might simply just run away from them by distracting ourselves. Now, the Buddha's approach to this situation is quite different. And his approach is simply wise observation, a calm and detached observation of whatever mental state comes up. So whatever unwholesome mental state or even wholesome mental state comes up. And so this then marks a big or signals a big difference from the instruction given by the Buddha himself with regard to bodily and verbal misconduct. So the Buddha's instruction for bodily or verbal poor behavior is change it. Let go of unwholesome conduct and replace it by some wholesome conduct. And Whereas when it comes to mental states, the Buddha does not say the same thing. He does not say, immediately replace an unwholesome mental state by a wholesome mental state. But he rather says, just observe. That's all. And so what we need to do is we need to observe in a non-reactive manner whatever is happening. Now, to this point, you may then say, well, fair enough, but what if my anger or my craving or pride and conceit or depression, whatever, is so strong that just ordinary non-reactive awareness doesn't do anything. It might even make the situation worse. So in this case, the Buddha does certainly speak of a last resort, and we find an instruction in this connection in the so-called Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta, the discourse on the removal of distracting thoughts. And there it says that if everything else has failed, one should simply resort to resort to crushing the mind with the mind. And what this means is to replace an unwholesome mental state through a wholesome one. Now, the instructions that are given with regard to the removal of distracting thoughts are, in essence, the following. And they're given in a progressive manner. So, if, for instance, some troublesome thought has arisen, then one should give attention to some other sign connected with what is wholesome. And so if thoughts of hatred keep arising, then one should replace those hateful thoughts by thoughts of loving kindness. And secondly, one should, if this is not helping, then one should examine the danger in unwholesome thoughts, such as hateful thoughts or thoughts of greed, and so on. And if this is not working, then one should try to simply forget those negative thoughts. Just ignore them and focus one's attention on some other object. Now, if this also doesn't work, then the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta recommends that one look for a possible cause for these thoughts. So, is there any underlying issue that might be triggering or fueling these thoughts? And if all of these first four methods don't work, then the Buddha recommends to crush mind with mind. And by crushing the mind with mind is meant that one replaces the unwholesome states by some wholesome states. And so if the one is then overcome by strong anger, one simply makes it a point to just think positive thoughts. And in this connection, the Satipaṭṭhāna Sutta also gives an illustration, which is basically an illustration regarding a deactivation of a particular process. And I'll change the illustration. Let's say you're sitting in the dining hall and you find yourself eating incredibly rapidly. So, spoon after spoon. And then, but fortunately you don't forget to be mindful of it. And and then you realize, my goodness, I'm eating that quickly. Is there any reason for this? What if I were to slow down a little bit? And then you slow down, you eat a little bit less quickly. And then after a while you realize, it's still pretty quick. What if I slow down my eating even more? This might even enable me to observe more carefully. And as a result of this, then you slow down your eating even more. And until finally you come to a point where you do everything involved in the eating so slowly that it becomes a real meditative eating session, and much wisdom arises. And so likewise for a mental state. If a particular mental state, like let's take restlessness, is very strong, we first realize, this restlessness is really too much. What if I try to calm down a little bit? And then one does this, and then after a while one realizes that there's still too much restlessness within me. What if I change this some more? And what if I try to become even more tranquil? And then so on and so forth, until finally the restlessness, at least temporarily, subsides. And so this process of gradual deactivation is actually quite helpful with regard to all of the unwholesome mental states. Now, in general terms, when we think of the instructions given in the passage under Chittanupassana, Satipaṭṭhāna, then we find that this Chittanupassana, or when practiced, will lead to a detached, non-reactive or balanced, and a it leads to detachment and non-identification with regards to the observation of mental states. And so the general direction of Chittanupassana, Satipaṭṭhāna, is the same as is the case for the mindful contemplation of feelings and of the body. So whatever comes up, we try at least not to identify with it, and not to get too reactive and carried away. Now, when we undertake this contemplation of the mind, we will also make another important discovery. Namely, at first, we might think that we are in control of the mind, and that the mental states arising in the mind are based or are pretty much dependent on what we want to happen in the mind. But then, upon closer observation, we may notice that in our meditation practice, we're sitting there trying very hard to develop concentration, and somebody or something causes a big noise, and then this gets us all upset. Now, an external event has an influence on the mind. And this then proves, at least to some extent, that the mind is not, or what is happening in the mind is not totally independent of external events, but rather very much dependent on external as well as internal events. And to give you an example, for an internal event, some strong pain arises, it gets stronger and stronger, and then sooner or later, what will arise in the mind? If we're absent-minded, aversion will arise. Yes, indeed. And or we experience some wonderful chills and thrills going through the body, soothing chills, and again, when we're absent-minded, what will happen? We may get attached or crave for more of the same. Now, when we undertake this contemplation of the mind, then we will understand the nature of those sort of three universal three roots of all unwholesomeness, namely greed, hatred, and delusion. And so when we are overcome by the fever of lust, then we will understand that there is no fire like passion. And so when we get angry about something, and we realize how much the body as well as the mind tenses up, then we will understand that there is no grip like ill will. And when confusion is, when delusion or ignorance is the predominant mental state, and we lose our bearings, and so we're all confused, then we will understand the Buddha when he says there is no net like ignorance, being entangled, caught up in this net. And thus, the Buddha has expressed all of this in Dhammapada verse 251, where he says, first in Pali, then in English, Nati raga samo agi, nati dosa samo gaho, nati moha samam jalam, nati tanha sama nadi. There is no fire like passion. There is no grip like ill will. There's no net like ignorance. There's no river like craving. So the contemplation of the mind yields many benefits. And one of those further benefits is this very simple, learning to make this very simple distinction between what? Wholesome and unwholesome? Yes, correct. And so when you talk to some ordinary person, a non-meditator, and you ask him, do you know what is meant by wholesome or wholesome mental state? The person may say, what are you talking about? So, wholesome and unwholesome are words that are not very well, or are not that common in society's general vocabulary. And so, overall in society, we can say, at least under certain circumstances, it is socially quite okay to get angry when the cashier is not handing back the right amount of cash, or if an employee is not doing what he or she is supposed to do, then we'll take our fist and bang it on the table. So these expressions of anger are seen as quite normal, quite wholesome. There's nothing wrong with this. But when we meditate, then our perception of the mind and the world starts to change. Now, before we're going any further and going into our passage containing the instructions, let's clarify the term citta. So what we're doing now is, or discussing, is citta nupassana. Anupassana is contemplation. Citta is a Pali word which translates as mind, or one's mood, or simply state of mind. And it's a term that oftentimes covers the mind as a whole, comprising its two major elements, namely consciousness and then a variety of mental states or mental factors. So basically we have two things, two ingredients to the mind: consciousness, and there's a total of 89, or in a wider sense 121 types of consciousness, and then there's a total of 52 different kinds of mental factors. So for your better understanding, one moment of consciousness arises and it will be accompanied by a certain number, varying number of mental factors, sometimes more, sometimes less, sometimes more on the wholesome side, sometimes more on the unwholesome side. So anyways, now the term citta covers both of those ingredients, and so refers to the mind as in general. Now, when we look at our basic instruction, then we find mention there of a mind unaffected by lust, just as an example, versus a mind affected by lust. Or a mind unaffected by anger and a mind affected by anger. Now, the expression a mind affected by anger simply means anger is present. So that's straightforward. However, the term a mind unaffected by anger, so a mind without anger, gives room to a number of different interpretations. And so a mind without anger may refer to what?
It sounds to me like it's just a difference between identifying with that emotional state. I guess I translate affected by as identified with.
That's not the main point. Although, well, in a wider sense, yes, okay. But apart from this, what else?
Peaceful mind?
Now what if you say a mind filled with loving kindness? Pardon? That would be good too. So, a mind that is without anger could be interpreted as meaning a mind overflowing with loving kindness. So a mind in which loving kindness is present. So hatred is gone, or anger is gone, and instead loving kindness is there. Or, the expression without anger may be taken to mean temporarily free from anger. So it doesn't, as you're experiencing in your meditation practice, there are moments when the mind is quite free from anger. So that's one thing. And then we can interpret this term without anger yet in another way. Not just temporarily free from anger, but permanently, totally free from anger. And a mind that is totally free from anger, in an absolute sense, is then a mind of what? Of whom? Of an arahant. There you go. So that then refers to the most extreme case of the person who has totally uprooted anger and once and forever. And the expression without anger may be interpreted or may assume yet another meaning, namely that a meditator knows the relative absence of anger, or then by extension of greed and delusion. So let's say you practice, and then sooner or later you gain the path of stream entry, and with this the anger will be not totally uprooted, but at least weakened. And then you realize, now there's not that much anger present in the mind anymore as before the experience. So, the term without anger, without greed, or without lust, and without delusion may assume, in accordance with the text, different meanings. And what I'm saying here is I'm taking this, or is based on the explanations given by Venerable Analayo in his book Satipaṭṭhāna and his chapter on Cittanupassana, which is really helpful. And when it comes to the ordinary states of mind, and in particular the last two, namely the contracted mind and then the distracted mind, apparently these are two states of mind that are important enough for the Buddha to include in his instructions. And they're important in a sense that a meditator who wants to do successful practice avoid these as much as possible. So, not to let the mind go into this shrunken, shriveled, contracted state caused by sloth and torpor, nor to allow the mind to get into this distracted state caused by restlessness and remorse. So a meditator then needs to find just the right balance, avoiding both of these extremes. Now, when the expression is used, the mind with lust, then this refers to the karmically unwholesome 8 conscious states of the plane of sense sphere existence. So, unwholesome, 8 kinds of unwholesome consciousness. Whereas, when the expression goes as a mind free of, or free of lust, or without lust, then this refers to karmically wholesome and karmically neutral mundane states of consciousness. And then the same thing goes for the other pairs. Now, maybe this much regarding... Oh no, there's still one more point. Namely, with regard to the ordinary states of mind, only 8 are mentioned. However, there's so many different kinds of mental states around. So you might object and say, well, what about those others? And so the answer to this is they are all subsumed under the term ignorance. So ignorance is being mentioned. The minds were affected by ignorance, and so whenever ignorance is present, then, I have to express it differently. Whenever an unwholesome mental state arises, whatever that unwholesome mental state may be, pride or wrong view or craving or this or that, then ignorance will definitely be present. Now, we need to observe those ordinary states of mind over and over again to then gain a proper relationship to them. And so to understand them in the true light of anicca, dukkha, and anatta. Now, fortunately, human or mental experience of human beings is not limited to only those ordinary states of mind. And the Buddha had a deep understanding into the mind, and so he himself had practiced a lot and had access to a number of rather outstanding or lofty states of mind. And by subjecting these lofty mental states to his really careful and mindful analysis of what is there, he then managed to clearly pinpoint, okay, this is so-and-so, this is a jhana experience, maybe first jhana, this second jhana, this third jhana, fourth jhana, and so on. And the ingredients of the first jhana are so-and-so, ingredients of another second jhana are again slightly different, and so on. So this then leads to a demystification of certain spiritual experiences. As human beings, we have a tendency to interpret, if not oftentimes misinterpret, our mental experiences or spiritual experiences. Now, when it comes to the first pair of lofty or higher states of mind, then this is about a great mind or an exalted mind, to know an exalted mind when it's exalted, and to know an unexalted mind when it's unexalted. Now, the term great or exalted in the Pali scriptural language is given as Mahagata, needs to be understood. And it is a term that is frequently being used in connection with the four divine abodes, the four Brahma Viharas. The four Brahma Viharas form a set of four qualities, mental qualities, or meditation on four mental qualities as part of samatha meditation. So samatha bhavana. And those are loving kindness meditation, metta bhavana, and then contemplation of compassion, karuna bhavana, and then contemplation of sympathetic joy, mudita bhavana, and then as the last one, upekkha bhavana, which is contemplation of equanimity. And so in the context of those, the expression exalted or great mind comes up. So when we practice the Brahma Viharas, then we should be aware of those mental states and understand them clearly and distinctly. Now, as for the next pair, namely surpassable and then unsurpassable, Now, the Pali term for surpassable is Sa-uttara, and it's a term that is again used in connection with the jhanas, and what it means is that one abandons a particular jhanic factor in order to proceed to the next higher level of absorption. So this you will not understand, and thus some further explanations are necessary. Let's say you've developed the first jhana, and so maybe using metta as your practice. And the first jhana consists of 5 jhanic factors. The 5 jhanic factors are initial application of the mind, vitakka, then the second one, sustained application of the mind, vichara, and then the third jhanic factor is joy, piti, the fourth one is sukha, which is happiness, and the last one is ekagata, or one-pointedness. So we have 5 jhanic factors. Now, when developing and experiencing this first jhana over and over and over again and getting better at it, gradually the mind gets somewhat, not upset, but somewhat dissatisfied with the presence of the first jhanic factor, namely initial application of the mind. What this means is the mind is with the object for a time, then it loses its object. Then it's with the object again, it loses it again. So it's a rather unsteady mind. And since this first jhanic factor is somewhat unsatisfactory, it then falls away. And this then makes a progression to the second jhana possible. And the second jhana here is in context of the 5-fold classification system. And the second jhana then no longer has vitakka, and it is, however, composed of sustained application of the mind, and then piti, so joy, happiness, sukha, and one-pointedness, ekagata. So the vitakka, initial application of the mind, is that factor that we can surpass. Now, different from this is the term unsurpassable, anuttara, in the Pali scriptural language. And this term refers to the fourth jhana, and this time using the 4-fold classification system, which then is governed by only 2 jhanic factors, namely equanimity and mindfulness. And it ends there. Even if one practices further, it's not going to get deeper than that. The 2 states of equanimity and mindfulness simply stay, even if one develops the so-called immaterial jhanic states. And thus, equanimity and mindfulness cannot be surpassed. They are unsurpassable. Hence, what the Buddha is referring to in a mind, or when one practices the jhanas and one gains the 4th jhana, then one should be aware, one should know this unsurpassable mind as unsurpassable mind. Now, this is in the context of the jhanas. However, the term unsurpassable also figures in the text under Vipassana meditation, and there it refers to full awakening. So the attainment of arahantship. And Yet the term unsurpassable may also include includes the reviewing knowledge after the realization of the Dhamma of some level of enlightenment, and when a meditator investigates which unwholesome mental states have fallen away and which ones remain and to which extent. And then when it comes to the pair of the concentrated mind versus the unconcentrated mind, well, this term refers to both samatha meditation, so serenity meditation or calm meditation, as well as insight meditation. And it refers to access, concentration, and full absorption in the case of the jhanic practice, but and on top of this, it refers to momentary concentration, kanika samadhi, in the context of insight meditation. Now, the last pair consists of the liberated mind versus the unliberated mind. And here, liberated, vimutta in Pali, refers either to a temporary or permanent experience of mental freedom from defilements in insight meditation and calm meditation. So this then gives you an idea of those four pairs among the lofty states. And when it comes, maybe just another general footnote, is when it comes to the contemplation of the mindful contemplation of the mind and contemplation of wholesome mental states, unwholesome mental states like greed, anger, delusion, wrong views, pride and conceit, restlessness and remorse, and so on. Well, in Nibbana, there is none of them. And so eventually, the practice of Cittanupassana will lead us to this experience of Nibbana, where all mental states are not perceived. And the contemplation of the mind is necessary in order to develop one's mind from a tender and rather fragile state to a rather mature and resilient state. The Venerable Sadhu Pandita likes to illustrate this in the following way, namely, a young plant or sapling is still very much affected by the vicissitudes of the climate. And so when it's cold, the sapling might die, or when it gets too hot, it might also die, or wither and die. And so it's important that the fragile and tender sapling grow into some strong plant or tree. Likewise, the mind in its untrained state tends to be rather tender, rather fragile, and rather reactive. And so as a result, we suffer a lot. But as meditators, we have the tremendous potential or opportunity to strengthen this mind, to work with it, and to see what is happening in the mind over and over again, and to learn to let go and to observe the phenomena in a detached manner, in a non-reactive manner, and then in the end, when strong equanimity is there, nothing will touch our mind. And even when we feel depressed, we no longer need to drive all the way from Rome to London. Or we no longer need to distract ourselves by going to the movies or to get drunk or anything like this. So let me conclude today's Dhamma talk by wishing may the contemplation of the mind, Citta Nupassana Satipaṭṭhāna, which is the third among the four establishments, may it lead all of us to an ever deeper understanding of the many aspects of the mind, and as a result of this, may we grow in mental maturity, and then equipped with much mental stamina and resilience, may we go through life being totally unaffected. And this is it for today. Now, we have a few minutes for some questions, clarifications, comments, if you have. Yes, Rick.
It seems like yesterday we were talking about Vedana feelings, and today we're talking about mind state.
Yes.
And partly maybe difficult to translation these terms. It seems to me that the mental states you were talking about that are so problematic for us are almost invariably bound up, mixed up with feelings.
Oh yes, that is correct, with feelings, and also leading to certain manifestations in the body.
And so I'm wondering why the Buddha chose to separate Vedana feelings as a separate category in the mental states, which are always seems to be bound up with feelings.
But well, as explained already yesterday, because there is this strong causal link or connection between feeling and craving, and it leads to so many difficulties that the Buddha apparently has taken the Vedanas, the feelings, as one particular topic or separate topic for observation.
So I guess to get to my question now, which is, what is the root cause of most of the suffering? Is it feelings, originating in feelings?
Apparently there's a quote or a passage somewhere in the text that say 100% of all suffering or unsatisfactoriness is rooted in the three the roots of all unwholesomeness, namely greed, hatred, and delusion. Which means not seeing the true nature of formations, and not seeing the unwholesome mental states as unwholesome, we then again and again fall into the various traps and suffer. And so the feelings contribute to this, and unskillful thinking contributes to this, and not being mindful of the nature of perceptions contributes to this. And see, as non-meditators, we are basically, the victims of the mind, of the mechanisms or mechanics of the mind. however, mindful contemplation brings a better understanding. We see the patterns, and as such, then manage to distract ourselves from those patterns. Does that kind of does it answer, or is it really to your question?
Well, it's a response. I guess my question is, from a practical standpoint, it's been very difficult for me to see thoughts. But I can get a feeling for me myself about feelings arising, passion or craving or aversion, these different feelings.
Wait. Just for clarification, please, don't use the word feeling for mental states. See, a passion is a mental state, but it's not a feeling. A feeling is as we discussed yesterday, the effective quality of an experience as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Seeing the mental states, yes, is good, and like passion, anger, hatred, whatnot. You have to see those over and over and over again, and the thoughts, gradually you'll see more of those too. It's just a matter of training in mindfulness, and at the beginning of our training in mindfulness, we'll see just the very tip of the iceberg of thinking, and then as our mindfulness improves, we'll pick up even more subtle thoughts. That at first are not that obvious. See, it's to understand the mind is not that easy. It takes quite a lot of practice. It takes training. It takes effort, mindfulness, concentration, and the wisdom needs to be there, and a number of other aspects need to be there. But if you keep at it, then gradually things get clearer. Okay, then what next? Let me see. Yes, please.
This is related, I think, probably to Rick's question. I very often have seen citta translated as heart-mind, and I wonder what your opinion is of that translation.
Who translates it like this?
I think I have primarily seen it in Mahayana sources.
Oh, well.
The writings of the Dalai Lama.
Oh, yeah.
And I wonder if it is considered at all in Theravada.
Well, in Theravada, usually it's not being translated like that as heart mind, but maybe the reason behind this is there seems to be a certain connection between the mind and the heart. And actually, modern scientific research now is gradually looking into this. And so the mind has an effect on the heart, and the heart in turn that may have an impact on the mind. And so, since the heart is also apparently governing our well-being and so on, maybe because of this it's included. As in the translation of the term citta. But in Theravada, usually usually the term citta translates as mind. And, maybe as an additional, or in addition to what has been said, the commentators give as the base for the mind the heart cavity. No? And so the base for the seeing process lies with the eyes. The base for the hearing process lies with our ears. The base for the smelling process is with the nose. The base for the taste process lies in the tongue. And the base for tactile experiences lies in the body itself. But somewhat difficult situation with the mind is that the Buddha himself apparently hasn't clearly given any base for the mind, material base, and thus the commentators felt there needs to be such a thing as a material base for the mind, and they've then taken up the notion which was current at their time in history, namely this idea of the heart cavity being the base of the mind. And so when the Mahayanists translate the term citta as heart-mind or mind-heart, then maybe that alludes to that.
That's the sense I have, but it gets to another question that I had in your description of citta as including consciousness, and I had thought that consciousness was specific to the sense gates. So the question is, what is the gate for consciousness of mind?
There is Dhamma. There is mind. What's the term for that? Manocita, I think. Or consciousness that takes the mind itself as an object that exists. No, just like you have seeing consciousness, hearing consciousness, smelling, tasting, touching consciousness, there's also consciousness. I think it's called Dhammacita. I forgot the term. I'll have to look it up. No, but it exists. No. Okay, then what next? Yes, there in the back. Stephen, afterwards.
What difference is there between what in Buddhism is called mental states and what we call emotions?
Oh, good question. The term emotion tends to be a rather complex thing, that covers different, maybe different mental states and some other aspects all together. Whereas in Buddhism, mental state is just a particular quality of the mind. So it's why, or it's best not to use the term emotion when you speak of mental states.
Yeah, I mean, I get it that there's a reason that we're not translating it as emotion, But then the word mental state, I think, causes confusion too, because then it's like it just sounds more like thought, it's something cerebral, and it's really a little more than that.
Well, the expression as mental state or mental factor is somewhat technical, and so and in that sense, well, you say neutral. That's the term I would go with, and indeed, that's what the Buddha intended. Just a very neutral and objective observation of what is. without getting too excited about those mental states. No, the term emotion indeed has this flavor of you'll be crying and then you'll be sad and at another point you'll be totally elated and joyous and so on.
So maybe this is just off the top of my head, that if it's an emotion, there's almost inherent in that some identification with it.
Yes, that's good. Or actually, that's a good point. Yeah, I'll go along with that. No. So we have then the answer to your question. No. So whereas in the case of a mental state, it's just what is, without the identification and just observing it in a non-reactive manner, in an objective manner.
So with emotion, we were sort of take it and run with it a little bit already.
What was that?
When it's an emotion, we already sort of taken it and ran with it a little
bit. Yes, indeed. Right. So that takes care of your question. And now, Stephen, your question.
Well, two things. The first one is maybe too general. In observing mind, in observing what's going on in mind, one of the things that I do run into is what I think of as the Archimedes problem, or infinite regression problem. Archimedes said, give me a place to stand and a lever long enough and I can move the earth. The problem is the place to stand. And that whereas it seems easier for me to observe the body, when I'm observing the mind, sometimes the mind starts concerning itself with observing itself. Anyway, so there's
right.
that, and I know it's a big question. So I have a more practical question. The more practical.
So wait. So in this connection, then, what's the question? Well, what to do?
Is it? Sometimes it occurs to me, oh well, this is simply the ultimate koan. It's impossible, and it will prove that if I really look at it, it will prove itself. That just observing that it's impossible proves that there is no place, that there is no I. That looking at it carefully, it will actually become apparent that there can't be an I. Because
right, indeed.
If there were an I, there would be an infinite regression.
Right, indeed. So that the whole Stephen, in the beginning of the practice, the contemplation of the mind is not. It doesn't come easily, because the mind is something extremely refined and therefore very difficult to observe. And indeed, the mind comes up with all sorts of tricks. However, in the course of our meditation practice, in particular during the higher insight knowledges, the mental states come more into the foreground. The physical objects kind of move into the background. They're not that perceptible anymore. And then it's at that point when a meditator gains a pretty good understanding of the mind. And so at that point, indeed, one sees, just like you say, that all there is different mental states that are occurring, and so there's no need for a self there, for an I there. No, it happens all quite nicely, without the notion of the self or ego. Okay, and then
the more practical question, or immediate question, relates to you having said yesterday that that feelings are always present. That if there's an object, then there's also a feeling.
Yes, right.
Relationship to that.
Yes.
So For instance, when I'm walking, I perceive, here are three things. I perceive the foot is gliding forward. I also, then it seems to me so there's that in the body, and then there's usually actually a mental thing, which is that I have an image of the foot, and that's in my mind. And then maybe I have a neutral feeling about the foot is gliding forward. And then as the foot hits down to the ground, I perceive the foot is moving, that the body is doing this, and then maybe I have a mental thing like anticipation of the ground. And I have a very light feeling of positive feeling with the anticipation. So in both of those cases, it seems to me there are three things happening at once. And I don't know whether it is possible to perceive three things at once, whether the things become like translucent, so that I mean, sometimes with the breath, it feels as though the breath is still there, but in the background as some other object comes to the foreground. Or whether there's actually a very fast progression, and I'm just, do I need to let go in order to perceive the feeling? Is there a moment of letting go of the body or mental image in order to perceive the feeling? Can one actually perceive the feeling and the body or mental image is still there in the background?
Your question is excellent. And so, the answer is as follows, that namely, on the surface, at times it certainly may seem as if we are knowing two or three or even four objects at the same time, not just like you've described very nicely. However, from an ultimate point of view and Abhidhamma point of view, one moment of consciousness will take in only one object at a time. And the way the mind is organized is that one moment of consciousness arises, it will be accompanied by a number of different mental factors, and this moment of consciousness will take in, be conscious of one object. And so the consciousness and the corresponding mental factors, they all work on this one object. Then that consciousness passes away, and a new moment of consciousness arises, again with some mental states accompanied, and that second moment of consciousness will take maybe the same object, or be conscious of the same object, but maybe also some other object. And then that second consciousness also disappears, and then a third moment of consciousness arises, which, let's say, then takes a third object, or is conscious of a third object. And since the mind is operating at such a great speed, so one moment of consciousness after another, arising, passing, arising, passing, arising, passing, that the illusion is created as if we are seeing or knowing three or four objects simultaneously. But strictly speaking, it is more of a linear affair, and it's one object after another. It's just that the mind is shuttling back and forth between different objects.
Good. So it then seems to me that that actually sticking with something becomes in a way impossible, because the thing that I'm sticking with is constantly interrupted by these other little things, like like if I'm aware of the feeling, as the foot is moving, I become aware of the feeling, and even for a split second, it interrupts the awareness of the foot.
Yeah, right. So, what you're describing is very well observed, and it sounds like you're experiencing what Sadhu Pandita calls the panoramic awareness. And so your main attention goes to one object, and simultaneously you're kind of aware of a number of other objects in the background. No? In which case, it's good to label or to give most of one's attention to the main object, and then just in a general way be aware of those other objects without labeling those other objects. So you give most of your attention to the main object, and the other ones you just notice along the periphery. And you'll see in time that the quality of your mindfulness will change, and then it will become more one-pointed, and then it's really all of 100% of one's attention is on one object at a time. So an object arises, the mind goes there. The object is gone, the mind goes to some new object arising. One after another, and not simultaneously. So things keep changing. The quality of our mindfulness keeps changing in the course of the meditation practice. Yes. Oh, Amy.
I'm following up on Stephen's question. So consciousness has to co-arise with an object? They have to exist together?
It's one moment of consciousness will take in or be conscious of one object,
Right.
and whatever whatever most predominant object that might be.
I don't get it.
Let's say you have three different objects, that are competing for attention. So one is this alarm clock here, then is a piece of paper, and then here we have this wonderful yellow emergency light, and so. Now you're paying your attention is more or less here towards this area, and then your consciousness will maybe it will settle for the most predominant object among the three. It will settle on one, and let's say because the color is so outstanding, it will go towards this one. Or to give actually a better example, you're sitting at home, and you're sitting on the sofa, the TV is switched on, and then you are enjoying a delicious dinner, and so involved in this experience is hearing, the reporters' statements on TV, and then also you'll be seeing the images on the TV. Then you'll have some maybe comfortable physical sensation in the body while sitting on the sofa, and then you'll be having your meal. So there's a taste impression there, And so these different things different objects are competing for your attention, and the consciousness will focus on one at a time. And the factor that plays an important role in this connection is manasikara, namely wise attention, or the directing of the mind. Manasikara is said to it's kind of the rudder of a ship, or just like the rudder of a ship determines the direction or the destination of the ship, so too manasikara determines the direction the mind is taking, or the object it is taking in.
So how is a choice being made on, say, the three objects you've chosen as an example, how is a choice made to direct the mind at which of the three objects?
Or whatever is more predominant.
You mean in terms of the sense doors?
Yeah, predominance. I suppose so. Predominance in terms of, let's say in this case, the color. And so this yellow here is quite outstanding, more so than the color of the other two objects.
So whatever our mind sort of goes to, whatever the sense door that our mind favors, is that what you're saying? Because you kept, the second time you said choosing the color of the emergency light.
No, I'm saying because the color among the three objects, this color is more outstanding or more conspicuous. So probably the mind goes towards that.
But can there be a conscious choice? Like, developing.
Oh, well, if
Because three things are happening, then because of various things, we've made a choice, as it were, to go to whatever is the.
Well, maybe if you have a particular interest in a particular object, well, then this will influence, of course, the whole thing. And it will then influence that mental factor of manasikara, and accordingly, that object of interest will be then observed or taken in. No. Okay. Was there one more question, Nicola?
Just a quick one. I'm interested in what you said last night with the Vedana being only one at a time, and in any one moment there's either pleasant or unpleasant or neutral.
Yes, right.
Time. Whereas with the mental states, you said that there can be a number of them arising.
Yeah, right.
Consciousness. And I wonder if you could just flesh that out a bit and give some examples of that.
Oh, for mental states, well, with regard to the particular experience, as mentioned yesterday, the 7 universal mental factors will be there. So contact and contact, feeling, perception, and then volition, and then the one-pointedness of mind, which is concentration, and then the life faculty, and the manasikara. And then on top of this, this initial application of the mind, sustained application of the mind may or may not be there, and then joy or zest, piti, may or may not be there. And if, for instance, it's an unpleasant object, and so it goes along with an unpleasant feeling, then maybe the anger is there as a mental factor, and that then will very much color the experience. Or if the experience goes along with a pleasant feeling, then in the absence of mindfulness, then greed will be there, apart from the 7 universal mental factors. And so then let's take another case. You're mindful of the situation, and so the 7 universals will be there. Then some of the occasional mental states, like I said, joy and effort and the initial application will be there, and then mindfulness will be there as a mental factor, and so concentration is present, effort, let's say, is also present, and then wisdom will be there. So then the nature of that particular object at the time. So the mind keeps, as a human being, we are exposed to external as well as internal conditions or situations that keep changing all the time. So the mind has to then go along with that and adjust to that. And so sometimes it will be on the wholesome side, sometimes on the unwholesome side, sometimes it's more on the neutral side, and so on.
With these categories in the mental state, that can be one in each category kind of thing. Is that
not just one in each, but
a number of mental states in the same category present? And more.
Yes, right. And if you like to, I brought the Abhidhamma book along, and you can look at that. there are plenty of charts. And so, charts that, or there's one chart that shows which mental state goes with what kind of consciousness, and so on and so forth. Some of them, they exclude each other. Yona.
Well, I just realized I was confused about, we talk of the initial application of aiming and sustaining. When you say it falls away, I'm confused because I know you have to make an initial effort to concentrate the mind using those factors.
Yeah, right.
But then you say it falls away, but the mind is still sticking to the object. So I guess I don't understand what you mean. Maybe I don't understand.
The way the Venerable Sadhu Pandita explains this is with initial application. When a meditator reaches about the fourth insight knowledge, by that time he or she is so skilled in observing an object that the mind, without much aiming, goes just right to the object. And so the example, the illustration that he gives is that of target practice. So the person who does target practice, a sharpshooter, at first needs to train a lot to get really skilled and skilled at hitting the bull's eye. But after weeks of training, the sharpshooter doesn't need to aim that much anymore, but just takes the gun and then pulls the trigger.
That term is used for that initial practice period before it gets sharp at a later point.
Yes, certainly you can say like that.
But you said that it falls away at the second.
This is in no. This was said in the context of the jhana practice. Okay. And so, and indeed it does never fall away. And in the Vipassana practice, that's what I've just explained. As a meditator moves through the first few insight knowledges and then gains the fourth insight knowledge, objects are occurring at great speed, and so mindfulness becomes extremely sharp, and so it no longer needs to aim much. It's right. It falls right onto the object of observation.
So there's not a direct correlation between the jhanas and the insight numbers that you've been talking about. There's some.
No.
Okay.
Samatha jhana practice and insight practice are two fundamentally different kinds of meditation practices.
But there's some overlap.
One can combine them. But it's wise. It's wise not to put both of them in a blender and mix them. Maybe, wait a minute, there was one more thing I wanted to say. Well, it's good to to do one thing at a time. When you do your insight or vipassana practice, you do that, and then maybe either beforehand or afterwards, you do your samatha practice. One overlap, if you're mentioning overlap, well, the Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw speaks of the so-called vipassana jhanas. No, you may have heard of those. Have you?
Yes.
You have. And those are experiences, vipassana experiences that are somewhat similar in nature to what occurs in the jhanas. And so Venerable Mahasi Sayadaw has a system of correlating some of those vipassana jhanas with insight knowledges. No? And so now let me see. I hope I know. It's not. What was it? So during the beginning of one's vipassana practice, there's a lot of the mind, the mind is not that steady yet, and so. Like in the first insight knowledge, when piti, so joy and happiness certainly arise, and also some amount of concentration is there, and the mind is still somewhat unsteady at the very beginning, but then gradually gets steadier. Then this could be compared or this could be called first vipassana jhana.
But some of the experiences are the same, like the piti and the does one experience similar things?
They're similar, but not exactly the same.
Yeah.
No, and please keep in mind that the main difference lies with the objects observed. In jhana practice, you're using some conceptual object that you're contemplating on or meditating with, and whereas in the vipassana practice, you use ultimate reality as an object. So, pains and aches and rising and falling and various sensations, mental states that or which truly exist, and you're not adding to those. You're not creating those.
Yeah, but it seems like when in what we're doing, that you're keeping your mindfulness very active, even though it's also very concentrated.
Yeah, that's correct.
And so they're working together rather than just slipping into a state where it's still.
Right.
Mindfulness.
Yes, right, indeed. Anna is correct. Then, Alan, you had maybe the last question for tonight.
I believe I heard you say in the fourfold configuration of the jhanas, in the fourth jhana, all that was left was, I think you said.
Mindfulness and equanimity.
Yeah, mindfulness and equanimity.
That's the way it is being described in the text, and now you wonder.
Well, the quality of mindfulness. I guess maybe that's perhaps for another discussion. But when the mind is so concentrated on equanimity, I always thought it was equanimity and one-pointedness.
It's correct, and that's indeed in the actual experience. It's equanimity and one-pointedness of the mind, but the way that fourth jhana gets described in the text, for one reason or another, the mindfulness is mentioned there.
Certainly intentionally so. In this area, it seems like there is the opportunity for great discussion about mindfulness and concentration being sympathetic practices and can be practiced at the same time.
mixing the mindful or mixing vipassana and samatha doesn't, at least at first, it's not absolutely not recommended, because you'll end up with a mixed bag of experiences, no longer knowing what kind of experience can be attributed to which kind of practice. No, and so that makes for unclear experiences. So it's much wiser, to do one thing at a time to gain skills in, let's say, first vipassana, and then once you're quite proficient in that, then you do your samatha. Then you do pure samatha, and once you've become skilled in both vipassana and samatha, then you can combine those, and this is known as yuganada, the coupling or yoking of samatha and vipassana. But this takes quite some experience.
Putting the cart before the horse, I'm told that to achieve anagami, that this practice needs to be perfected. Yes.
Those statements are there, but it depends on whether you want to go into Nirodha. It seems that way, whether a person wants to go in Nirodha Samapatti or not. And there are plenty of disciples of the Buddha who did just pure vipassana without any samatha, and they gained arahantship. No. So, the mind is flexible, and it can be trained in different ways. But samatha and vipassana by nature, just by nature, the way they're set up are different. Yeah, maybe different in the sense that vipassana practice clearly generates wisdom, and of course involved in this is the arising of concentration, whereas in samatha practice it generates different levels of concentrations coming in the form of the absorptions, and there's not that much wisdom in samatha practice. So a samatha practitioner may have gained the first jhana, second, third, fourth jhana, even some of the immaterial jhanas, and yet not understand even the very basic distinction between physical and mental phenomena. No, there's plenty of evidence for this in the text.